King David is another very interesting example because most people would say his greatest leadership error was his sin with Bathsheba, which was obviously one of his greatest moral failures. But he remained in leadership after that error. He was punished. His people were punished. He lost his son. The people went through a great plague, but he wasn't removed from leadership, which is a really interesting observation. But later on, he just about lost the whole kingdom, and he lost it over another issue. He lost over the issue of his children, when one of his sons killed another one, and then he became estranged from that son. And this whole story of Rehoboam and Jeroboam and that whole issue, those issues around that, basically started unraveling the kingdom. When his son stood up against him, he said to his people, well, we just need to flee. He fled across the Jordan River, then had to retake the land. Then when his son was killed, he began to weep and become just out of control emotionally, to where Joab, his commander, said, if you don't pull yourself together and support these people who have fought for you, the final state is going to be much worse than the earlier one. And what you find is kind of this unraveling disaster around his family, where David doesn't act in ways that are like the David we know. David is the man who is proactive. He always solves problems. He's the man who's full of faith. He's the man who knows how to fight, who holds ground and goes up against Goliath. And here you have just the opposite, a man who is not engaging in problems and leaving them, not solving them, running when there's opposition, falling into a place of faithlessness and unbelief, and then becoming so controlled by his emotions that he can't even lead. What's the issue that's going on here? The text is not obvious on this one. Some of the other ones it is. But I would call this leadership guilt or leadership remorse. I really believe it came out of his own sin with Bathsheba and then watching this unfold in his family. And that he got to a place where he really was hijacked by his own feelings of remorse. And so when this issue came up with his family, he's thinking, oh, my son, I wish it were different. It obviously wasn't. But that feeling of remorse and guilt caught him took him to a place of powerlessness. And sometimes leaders, as they look back on the past, they make mistakes and confess them and deal with them, but there's an ungodly remorse. There's a remorse that doesn't take into account God's grace, that doesn't receive His forgiveness and salvation. Corinthians talks about that. It says worldly guilt brings death. Godly guilt leads us to, that's kind of sorrow, leads us to repentance and leaves no regret. And you have David who is living with constant regret, constant remorse, constant guilt. And that guilt was not from God. And that guilt actually just about destroyed he just about lost the kingdom, just living in that remorse. So I think leaders are not aware sometimes of the impact of leadership remorse, always looking to the past and thinking about the things that went wrong or they made mistakes and not actually taking them to the cross. And I think the antidote for that is really embracing God's grace as a leader and being willing to understand that the redemption that Christ provides on the cross is what we need to rely on, and not on our ability to somehow put back together what we broke, because we're not going to be able to. But to truly receive God's grace and move forward in confidence that He's with us and that He's forgiven us.